Hi everyone, I'm Jackie. I'm an English major and a secondary ed minor here at the University of Illinois.
Hi, I'm Chastity. I major in sociology and I'm minoring in criminology, and I'm a student here at U of I.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm an English major, secondary education minor here at the University of Illinois. So our social justice project, it deals with the education of students with immigrant backgrounds in America, specifically pre-K to third grade. Um, our title for our project is Zusammengehörigkeitsgefühl. This is a German word, and it means a sense of unity. We think this is sort of relevant because a lot of immigrant students are bilingual, and it says a little bit about what we're trying to go for by incorporating this huge long word. So personally, this project is important to me because I grew up in the city of Chicago, going to school there from first to second grade, and then I moved to the suburbs a little bit later. And in both settings, there were students from many different immigrant backgrounds. And one thing that I noticed that I didn't pick up on at the time, but as I get older and I look back on it, I see that there was some sort of disparity between immigrant students, specifically those who didn't speak English as a first language, and their white U.S. born counterparts, or even other immigrant children who have a little bit of a better grasp on English. And I'll let one of my group members talk about their personal relation to the project.
Sure, I'll go. I really feel like this topic is important because it deals with the early education of children, and that is like, their starting point for the rest of their educational career. So if, when they're little and they feel like they don't fit in or they don't belong and that they have to change themselves some reason for this education, then like, what is that saying? And how are they going to grow up through the educational system? Like, that's oppressive and that's just not right. Education is something that's really valued in the country. So for people to say who fits and who doesn't fit is just ridiculous. So I'm really hopeful with the help of my group that we're going to be able to spread this topic and the information that goes along with it to other people who believe in letting these children really express who they are through their identity and culture. I just want them to be who they are, and more people should know.
In my opinion, I do believe as well that this topic is important. I actually relate to this in my own personal life. I do have family who are immigrants. And also like in school, when I was in elementary school as well and high school, around that age, there were students, it was hard for them because their parents were not documented. So sometimes they couldn't get resources that they needed, or like just doing certain like activities or stuff like that because they didn't have their full like paperwork and everything. And even now, like voting, that's like a problem for some undocumented students. You have to be a certain age, of course, but once you are that certain age, you still can vote because why? You're not documented, you don't have your paperwork and everything. And it's just so unfair, especially in today's society, and how I don't know. It's just sad, and I feel like everybody has a voice. Everybody deserves to vote, and in all age groups, whether it's starting from early elementary, which we're most focused on, to even our ages now. So.
Going back on something Jackie had said, obviously it's really important in early education because children, this is like when they form their identities. We have some sources that will include links for. One study I found um, focused on how discrimination affects these young children. So around 4 to 5 is when kids, usually start school, and they sort of figure out the relationship towards the people around them, not just in school, but like in their community, their neighbors. Um, and they learn observationally and socially before they even enter school. Um, and I have a quote here from one of these sources. What children intuit about their identity, abilities, and capacity to learn at this age stays with them their whole lives. Thus, the school setting can have a profound impact on a child's lifelong well-being and development. So this is important because, like we said, younger children, even before they enter school, are already starting to try and identify who they are. So being discriminated against early on, even before, some of these kids don't even have the ability to defend themselves in English against remarks that they hear from peers or teachers. And this negative reaction to their culture, to their identity, ends up impacting their entire academic career, the success they'll find. And so this early age range is very important to try and accept students and their differences.
I think going off of what you said, some of their differences are obviously going to be their home life. I mean, so lots of my articles and resources were talking about, the parents not being speaking English. So they are expected to go to school and speak English at school and come home, and then they're supposed to converse with their family in their language in order to understand each other. And they're just like constantly being pulled back and forth. And that's obviously a struggle for them, when they're told to do one thing and not the other. So it's just like stuff like that. And what else is happening at home? Like, do they not have enough resources? Are they not getting enough of what they need? And then they come to school and they're really tired or hungry, or, stuff like that is like really other important things to look at. It's not just like one thing that's affecting their education. It's lots of things in their environment.
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead.
I know, Chastity, you've talked about this. That it's important to think about where the how the student immigrated here in the first place. If they are a first generation immigrant student, did they get here? Did they fly here? Did they have to be smuggled here? Did they have to wait in some sort of center before they were actually allowed to enter the country? And did they even come here with family? Did their family have to come here first, save up money, and then that allowed the children to come? So all these factors around how immigrant families even get here to America, that impacts their life. Like Jackie said, it's do they have food? Were they from some war-torn country and they're refugees now? And then are they even able to cope with this more, like, now that they're in America and they're in a setting that might be a little more relaxed and less anxiety filled than they were before? Are they able to just chill out? Are they even mentally capable to do that?
Yeah, I actually want to go off on that because just like how you said, like, okay, they come here. So now what? How do they begin? How do they start their life? Same thing with their parents. They're the ones that's taking care of the children. But what they got to keep thinking about in the back of their head is like, hey, I can't get taken away. These are my kids. I can't go back to where I was from. And that's something to think about even for the kids too. They're going to be worried like, hey, am I going to come home and my parents are going to be there, from school. But my thing is, so yes, they came to the US, but what's their next step in life? Like how they get that education, because aren't some education resources not available for them? So like how can we support them and make sure that they receive the education that they deserve? Same thing with their parents. Are they getting the jobs that they need to support their family? Even in general, getting a job just for them. Same thing, they don't get the if So, for example, a parent gets a job. Do they get the same taxes as us? Do they receive the deductions or anything, or is it unfair? Do they get more off of their check, for example? And it's just in general, how do they start their life? That's one of my big questions I want to answer.
Not only do we have to worry about things outside of their lives, but like what about like in the education system? Like what about the teachers? What are they doing for them? What about administration? What are they doing for them? I know Jordan had brought up a thing in our earlier talk about colorblind teaching, and I thought that was super interesting. Maybe he wants to go into depth about that a little.
Yeah, so this is something you see a lot in maybe like less schools with less resources. There are certain teachers who will take the approach of colorblind teaching, which may sound like a good idea initially, a teacher not wanting to see color between their students and try to treat them all equally. But what this actually does is disregard a student's background, their culture. And this is one of the reasons that younger students from immigrant backgrounds have so much trouble, because their culture, their language is devalued by teachers. If there's a school that's so underfunded and teachers have less resources, maybe the teacher genuinely just does not have the time to, let's say there's a student coming into your class from Vietnam. It might be a good idea to try and learn like a few Vietnamese phrases, a little bit about the culture, to try and work with that instead of against it, like a colorblind teacher would. But I mean, for these underfunded, under-resourced schools and teachers, that is just so much on top of what they're already dealing with.
So just like doing survival teaching, which is a concept we learned this year. Not so much like as in like early childhood, which is what we're talking about, but the aspect of just surviving just to get them through type thing is something that our education system obviously struggles with too.
I want to explain, I want to go on to about not only the children, like I said, their parents as well, but how can we help the parents to, receive their resources for their children, such as, of course, education. That's our main topic. Or even, healthcare. How about, for example, they get injured in school or they need to get sent to the hospital. How they're getting taken care of if they don't have their documentation, That's something to look into, and how to, what are scenarios. That's one scenario. And then how can we help them, basically? What's our solution for us students and future educators? How can we help our children to make sure they receive the support that they need?
And going off of that, sorry, there are programs and centers and organizations that try and ease the transition of an immigrant family coming into a community. And these do sometimes include, resources for mental health, for healthcare, tutoring, but they're really temporary. They're usually about 6 to 18 months when the family first enters the community. And they're sort of a little disjointed. There's like healthcare over here, tutoring over there, and they're not always in communication with each other. So that's where this struggle of like, how do we help an injured student who maybe breaks his wrist or something, or a student filled with anxiety, like we said, if they come from a really maybe politically unstable background in the country they're from, their anxiety could be through the roof, like before they even enter school. And trying to address this is really important. And we don't currently take the best approach because, as I mentioned, every program is a little disjointed.
I think maybe a solution, not a solution, but a step towards progress would be some kind of advice, something for teachers to take away from this. So like when they come in as a teacher, they get some kind of like what to expect or what they should be able to do, how they can help these types of students, something that is universal for teachers in the education system, because not all of them are going to be progressive and want to help with these types of situations. But if they know, they can feel more comfortable, maybe want to help more, just to get it out there, to be known about.
Yeah, there are a lot of sort of assumptions that teachers already have about immigrant students, and these assumptions sort of they come from media portrayals, or maybe someone has a basic understanding of students from this country or that country, and that if a teacher doesn't challenge these idea, like, I'm blanking on the word. If teachers don't challenge these, what was that?
The common stereotypes that like everyone knows. Like when people hear the word immigrant, I can only imagine what they think automatically off the top of their head from what society has made it into, So that's really important to understand.
Yeah, and going off that, so teachers not challenging these ideas themselves, questioning their own thinking, is really detrimental, because they have students to take care of. And I maybe when teachers hear the word immigrant, they'll think of immigrants in America from countries that we often think of. I know in the suburbs of Chicago there was a lot of Hispanic immigrants and Eastern European. So I mean, maybe a teacher up there expects a Russian student, or a Mexican or maybe Central American student to come in. But what about students from, I mentioned earlier, Vietnam, or other lesser well-known Asian countries? I know there was a lot of Chinese and Korean students too that I went to high school with, but what about someone from Vietnam or Cambodia? There often aren't enough resources or tools available to these students, and it just it's rough, because this subgroup of a subgroup gets an even lesser education than, let's say, a immigrant student from Mexico, because Spanish is pretty readily available in most teaching settings nowadays, but not everyone knows how to speak Cambodian or Vietnamese.
I want to go off on that because I remember, like, even in high school, for example, this person's Mexican. Oh, you're an immigrant. That's what they think right away, which it shouldn't be that case, because just because you're Mexican or Korean or anything, any ethnicity, doesn't mean you're an immigrant. And I feel like, probably depending, every school is different, but even in my life, I wasn't really educated on this. It took me to, like, I was older, like late, like 8th grade and up, for example. That's when I started learning about immigration and what happens in this world. So I feel like there's a change could happen, within early elementary. When are they going to get taught in this? When are they, teachers and faculty going to teach younger students about this? So why does it have to take them this long to learn, all this information and know about their backgrounds at an older age? Because in my life, I learned later on, and I feel like it should change and, help younger students learn about this and get more involved and stuff.
Yeah, going off of that, there is I'm having a little trouble finding the exact quote, but in one of the articles I read, there's a pretty haunting, chilling for me, exploration of how some of these students who experience discrimination early on, maybe even before they enter school, just from their community, they'll sort of internalize that, and then they'll start noticing things like, why they're mainly, white looking Barbie dolls, or there's not as many Hispanic children like me on TV that I see, or I noticed this one Asian father in the office having trouble reading a form that's only given out in English. And this is a real problem for young students who they'll just start thinking that that's the norm, that their underrepresentation is sort of normal. And that's what I sort of touched on this when I mentioned why this is important to me, because there are students who sort of think that the education they're getting is, adequate, especially at younger ages, but it's really not, and it's kind of messed up once you think that like these kids internalize this discrimination and see it as sort of normal.
Yeah, that's definitely a big problem with everything in the education system, obviously. I mean, they bring that outside stuff with them, and then they're like, oh yeah, I'll just accept it for what it is because I get it, So, and I think it's real easy for teachers to do this with kids that are younger. Like you said, Chastity, like 8th grade and up is when you started learning about this stuff, because like little kids, like, why do they care? Or why should they know about any of this? Because once they read it, they'll already be like, is kind of, how I feel like some people feel about this. If we can change them to think about the things the other way, how we think about it before they get, to a certain end, so.
Yeah, going off of that, it's not always just the young kids either, it's their families too. If a family is, coming into a community in America from a different country, initially the parents will want to be involved in their children's education. Parents are most involved with their children's education from pre-K to 3rd grade, but there's so many barriers preventing them from having like a smooth dialogue with the education system, because as we've mentioned, teachers, administrators, schools have sort of sometimes, preconceived notions of what an immigrant family is like. And if this family doesn't speak English, well, that this dialogue just becomes so much more muddied. The parents will be seen as, not being involved, or, not caring for their children's education, when this is the time where they care the most. They want their kids to grow up and have an opportunity and be educated, be integrated into the American school system. But instead they're sort of pushed away by teachers who think they don't really speak English that well, so they're not, taking a proactive approach towards their children's education, which is just, it's not the case. There just needs to be more patience and resources and and communication.
Well, it's also ironic that, if this administration thinks that, oh, well, they're immigrants, then their parents must speak their own language, not English, then why do they send forms and stuff like that? Probably in English. Why aren't they sending it home in something that their parents can read and participate with them and, be united in this, in their education with them? But they can't, because the school administration is like, well, it doesn't matter. We'll send it home in English anyway, because that makes sense to us.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had to okay, so going back a little bit, Chastity mentioned that there are, oftentimes for Hispanics, people see them as like, oh, you're an immigrant, right? Or you come from an immigrant family. Me personally, I am Mexican. I was born in America. Both my parents are Mexican, born in America, but I was always seen as like, oh, your parents came from Mexico, right? It was probably a tough struggle for them to get here, right? And I was like, no, they were born down the street. But my parents were, they worked a lot when I was young, so I often spent time with my grandparents who were immigrants, and they only really spoke Spanish. So having to show certain, field trip forms or report cards to my grandparents so they could pass the message along to my parents was really rough, because when me personally, and this is something that's explored in one of my sources, when there's a really hard time trying to balance, your, your cultural identity at home, and the identity you want to have with your peers in school, and the identity that your teachers expect you to, sort of have to learn better. So yeah, there's like so many disconnects that are caused between so many different groups of people just because immigrant students or bilingual students are seen as having a lot more work that needs to be done in order to be successful in education.
Yeah, I feel like we could go on for hours about this, honestly, because there's just so much to talk about and so many other aspects to it. But we will probably leave you guys there for your own thoughts, unless anyone else has anything to say. I know there's so much more to say, but
Real quick, just talking about, we've talked a lot about the problems, and obviously there are some solutions that have been taken in the past, couple decades, few years specifically. One that I found from my Adelman and Taylor source is just the idea of supporting the transition of a immigrant family coming to America. The entire school needs to be, and community needs to be willing to welcome them, and provide that social support that I had mentioned earlier. All those different health resources, tutoring resources, just keep on, like letting the family know, like, if you need something, we are here for you. We want to make this as smooth as possible for you. And also just the idea, this is from the Adair article, is to focus on the deficits of immigrant families. Don't see their, Spanish as their first language as a problem. See that as a opportunity to incorporate something new into the classroom. Don't see English, a student not being able to speak English as a roadblock. See it as a different way to grow. And then, did you guys have any specific solutions that you wanted to touch on?
just thinking as a community, as a future teacher, I feel like this is something that's important to me because, maybe I will have immigrant students in my classroom, and I want to make them feel welcome and included, and I want their families to feel included as well. So I think this is a really important topic for, future teachers, or really anybody, because, you don't want to make anyone feel unwelcome wherever they are. So I just think just making them feel like you want them there is something everyone should know.
Yeah, and to start closing this off, I do want to say thank you guys for listening. My opinion, how I think this could help and what can we do in the future or later on. Me as what I want to work with in the future for my career, I want to work with the criminal justice system. So even this could still help me, and how I want to help others, especially children. Like you have said, Jordan, we're here for you. We're here to listen. Whether if it's not here, physically at home with you, we're still here for you, whether either it's at school or not. Just in general, we're going to be here for you. And even for families and, their children starting a new life, maybe like we had mentioned before, start a GoFundMe page. Raise up money to help them with, providing school supplies, books, even food, or even shelter, just something to help them to start their life, and move on forward and know that you are important. And
Yeah, so just as a final idea, just the student and family knowing, just having in the back of their head, knowing that they have a support system in their community, that just relieves so much stress and anxiety that is probably going to develop just from moving from one place to another. And just to sort of close us off, we have our call to action that sort of reminds us, and we want to remind people really with this project, that a lot of people, most people in America come from immigrant backgrounds. As we mentioned, immigrant is a word with a sort of misinterpreted connotation, but we're almost all immigrants in America. So we just need to remind people of that, because it's very important for people to remember that. And it's just that certain subgroups of immigrants are being discriminated against in the education system, personally, through attacks by teachers, colorblind teaching, or discrimination like racist remarks from students, their peers, but also structurally, like we said, some of those resources aren't totally working together and communicating in a coherent way for the family. And then there are just examples of schools not having proper resources or competent teachers, as we've mentioned, and that's just the structural aspect that really discriminates against students. So we want to keep exploring the successes of what's working, moving towards a culturally responsive method of teaching. But we also, as we've explored the drawbacks from certain methods of teaching and certain ways about integrating a family into the community. So we just want to just keep working towards bridging this gap that is just between immigrant students and the American education system that's been going on for far too long. And we're just working towards bridging that. Yeah, no, that's it.
Okay, well, feel free to share a video on any social media you feel like. We'd love to get our word out to bigger audiences. And thank you for coming to listening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.